but had a career change.
Sorry.
But had a career change for 20 years, and that's her back at university and taking a PhD on the alpine lady fern. Now, know nothing about the alpine lady fern, but I know about the lady fern. Anyway, she went on from that to work at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh on conservation of Scottish plants, and she was also involved in general ID plant education and education in ferns. So she's a good person to have us here talking with us tonight about ferns. She was a bit too modest and didn't mention the MBE. She was awarded in 2014 for her work. But unless that was another Heather McHaffie, I don't know. Tonight, we're all going to benefit from the expertise and knowledge that she has as she takes us through kind of the life cycle of the fern, but also takes us through a kind of general ID for some of the 10 most common ferns, which I think will be interesting to most of us. I know we all try a bit with ferns, and some more successful than others. So thank you very much for taking your time tonight, Heather, and over to you.
Thank you. Right, now we've got the worrying bit where I share my screen and hope it's going to work. It's this one we want. And we put it up to full screen. Oh, we'll go. Oh, there we are. Right, can everybody see Ferns Are Fantastic?
Yes.
Good, we're all in business here. Right, excellent. What I was going to do, actually, I'm afraid it's crept up a bit from 10 ferns, because if I do, well, you always think, we'll just do 6, we'll keep it easy. But it's very hard to get, just 6 of the commonest ones. And you people actually are living in a much more exciting part of the country than me. And you're going to have ferns that are not very common around Edinburgh, but you have them a lot. So I'm afraid I've included rather more. I thought it was just 4 more, and I realised it's 6. But I don't like to tell people a huge amount all at once. It seems a bit unfair. But since this is being recorded and will go on YouTube, you can always watch it again, can't you? So here we go. You'll all know that ferns are very good at planting themselves without any assistance from anyone else. And these ferns get called volunteer ferns. And here's some in my brother and sister-in-law's garden. And these 2 are the commonest ones that you get, I'm quite sure, both round about you and round about Edinburgh. So really one of the very common ones that you need to know is this common male fern. It's a Dryopteris, and I'll explain why, and it's called Dryopteris felix mass. The felix bit is nothing to do with cats. People always try to put an E in there. It's Felicinium for ferns, and mass is the male bit. So you can understand the Latin name there. And then another terribly common one is the common lady fern. I'm afraid I'm not actually going to mention the alpine lady fern today. That would have been yet another one and another one. So we'll just stick to the common one.
I'll bring it through here for the minute.
Sorry, is this okay? If you compare them, the male fern, it's got little side branches that come out, and little leaflets or pinnae coming off there. And that means it's what we call twice pinnate. So that's 1 going down there, 2 coming out here. And then you look at the lady fern, and lo and behold, it's got a side branch, and it's got its little pinnules or pinnae coming off it. So that's twice pinnate as well. But the lady fern is much more frilly, and that's why it got called the lady fern. They used to not understand about fern reproduction, and they thought, well, you've got this rather sort of coarser looking fern that did look very like this frilly ladylike fern. So they thought you had the male fern and the lady fern, and that's how you've got a therium for the lady fern, and it's Felix, the fern femina, and that's its name. If you look on the back of the ferns, that's where all the useful information is, and that's what you want to do if you really want to identify them. So here we are with our male fern, and here's the lady fern. Now, one of people's complaints about ferns is that they all look the same. And certainly when you look at the upper side, often they do. But looking on the underside here, I hope instantly think, wow, that looks different. And you have a little covering here that goes over the spore cases where the spores are underneath. And for Dryopteris, all Dryopteris, They call it kidney shaped. You might think it's just round, isn't it? But hopefully that particular little covering there, you can see it's got a wee notch in it one side. The colouring is as it matures, and these ones, the spores are nearly ready to be shed. In fact, some of them have come out here and got caught up in something that was eating them. But so kidney shaped, rounded kind of indusium, this covering for the spore cases on male fern or Dryopteris, and for the common lady fern, there's this little curly indusium covering over the spore cases. Some people say it's J-shaped, some people say it's comma-shaped or half-moon shaped, but it's very distinctive. It's almost like a whole lot of minute little curled up caterpillars on the underside. And that's very immature because they're all still white, but that will go browner as the spores mature. And I'll be showing you different photographs and you'll see these at different stages. One of the problems of fern identification is that they are changing all the time, all through the summer. And if you want to look at these structures, you need to get in there fairly early. So those two are the utterly, utterly common ones. And if you know those two, you'll be doing really well. And that will get you around an awful lot of the ferns that you're going to see. But as I said, you live in a really exciting part of the country. You've got lots of other things too. Because you'll have quite a lot of acid moorland, one of the male ferns that you're going to have is the one that gets called the scaly male fern. And its distinguishing feature is it's much more yellowish in its foliage, and it's much, much more scaly. Now, the name here, Dryopteris affinis, you'll notice I've written ag. Now, if you're interested in subdividing things like brambles and dandelions and roses and quite a lot of rather awkward groups, you might want to try and subdivide this particular one. And some people love splitting it up into lots of things that they call species. And the rest of us find the distinctions a wee bit difficult and just tend to call it an aggregate. But I just wanted to warn you about that. Basically, it's a more yellowy green thing. It's lovely, it's beautiful. This is a huge, massive clump. It's bigger than me. It's a lovely, lovely fern. But you will, even without being sort of prompted, you will see quite a lot of variation in it. So just remember, this one is an aggregate. And if we look on the back, you'll see it's more scaly. You've got your more yellowy green kind of fronds. And it's very like the male fern. It's still got its side branches and the pinny coming off. Here's a tiny wee bit of Felix mass, the male fern, just inset. And you can see what a greener stem it has. And it's a wee bit more toothy all the way around the edge of its little side leaflets or pinnules there. Whereas this one tends to be a lot smoother. Sometimes it's rather sort of chopped off looking at the top edge. But another thing which you really find on most of the scaly ferns, though it's more obvious on some than others, is what people call the black spots. And if you look in at the base of the side branches, you ought to be able to see a little dark region. Can someone give me a bit of feedback and say if it's even slightly obvious on this slide? Yes, anybody?
Yeah, I can see it.
Convinced, good. It's a bit funny speaking to people and you can, well, I can see about two of you down the side and that's it. With an audience, you can look out and if you get this gaping faces, you think, oh dear, they didn't get that one. Anyway, so the scaly male, much, much more scaly, often rather dark scales. And as I said, quite a lot of variation because it is an aggregate. But you go for this goldeny colour and an increased scaliness. As I said, there are lots of them, lots of spots, but also lots of different, well, some people call them species, they used to call them varieties. There's a lot of debate about how many there actually are. I wouldn't worry about that, just enjoy them. And I love it. In about June time, here's going down to Little Ferry. Some of you, I go on holiday to Dornoch every year. And here's these wonderful, lovely, goldeny coloured ferns. I just love them at that stage. When they first come up in the spring, they're much brighter than all the other ferns. They really leap out at you. And you know that that's going to be a scaly male. This one here is a scaly male, but you'll notice it's not as far on, say, as these ones. And that is probably because it's a different scaly male. As I say, don't worry about that. Just enjoy them. Now, here's a wee test for you. Can you convince yourself that this clump at the front here is a bit more bluey green and all the rest of them at the back are more yellow? Is that awfully hard to see, or can somebody unmute themselves and say yes or no?
Yeah,
I can see it.
yeah.
Yes, okay. That's the sort of thing you look for. Now, usually the scaly male grows where it's more acidic. This one is being very awkward because the common male fern does tend to like a little bit more lime. Might be there's a big old stone there and it's just sort of leaching down the slope a bit. But that's the sort of colour difference that you see when you're looking at the common male fern, much more greeny stem, much darker, more scaly looking stem on the scaly male. So just the jizz of the thing is different colours. What you do if you're colourblind, I'm not quite sure, but that goldiness, especially early on in the year, is very obvious. So I hope you can convince yourself it's very obvious in there as well. But this is, as I say, one of the complaints people make about ferns is they all look the same. And if you took people out for the very first time, you said, now this one is different from this one, they would all think, oh dear, is it? But, you know, you look, you turn it over, you see that this one's not got spots at the back, and this one, can't see it on this, but, you know, there's little spots just where the side branches come in, and this one will be much more scaly. Often, you can even see a darkness on the upper side of the frond. But as I say, most things happen on the back. So always turn them over and have a good look on the back. So we've had the male fern, the lady fern, and the scaly male fern. But again, where you're living, you're getting a fern which is probably very common, but we don't get much around Edinburgh at all. So I'm sorry, I've just sneaked in another one here. And here we are, we've got the same old format, got a nice stem up the middle, got lots of side branches. The side branches divide into little leaflets. It's got a yellowy green colour, very sort of fresh looking. It's not very scaly. You might very easily walk past that and think it was a lady fern. But if you look more closely, and especially turn it over, on the back, you've got these little, well, you've got the side branch and you've got little secondary ones coming off, so it's still twice pinnate. But do you see they're not toothed at all? That's almost a sort of oval kind of shape. And when you look at where it has its fertile parts, on the lady fern, they were on the veins towards the centre of the little pinule, the small section. Whereas here, they're around the edge. And in actual fact, they don't have any kind of indusium at all. It's not very clear on this one. I thought I had a clearer one, but I couldn't find it. You're looking straight at little clusters of the spore cases. So no indusium, no covering. And these individual splodges or spots of spore cases, you call each one of them a sorus. And you've got a round sorus. And each sori, so it's one sorus, lots of sori, site for soris, as I always say, goes round the edge. And actually, it's so pretty. It's like little beads or something round the edge. Very, very attractive. And that's what's so wonderful about ferns, because I think they are incredibly attractive. People think, oh, they're just green. But no, I mean, they're all different shades and colours. This one is such a fresh lemony yellow green. And the name lemon-scented fern comes from the fact it's got glands. And if you rub your hand all the way up that frond, especially when it's youngish, you get a kind of sticky feeling on your hand. And then you smell your hand and you can have a nice little debate with other people about what it smells like. Because some people say, oh yes, that's lemony, and other people don't agree because, you know, the way we all smell things a bit differently. But definitely those glands are there. You can't see them in this photograph because we're getting on towards further on in the season. But certainly on a nice young frond there, if you got your hand lens on the back, you would see like little almost pins with little knobs on the end. Really, really tiny, like little hairs, knobbly hairs, I suppose. And those are the glands. And really, really distinctive, it has white scales. Nothing else has white scales. So even when it's just coming up in the spring, before it's had much of a chance to open out, even if you're just looking right into the middle of it and it hasn't hardly expanded at all, you see these wonderful little croziers, little curled up fronds, and they've got these fantastic white scales. So that's totally distinctive for the lemon-scented fern. And yeah, I always say you can tell this one in the dark anyway, because if you're sort of feeling your way through ferns, you'll be able to pick that one out without much difficulty. But it's a lovely one, but it likes it fairly acid and it likes it fairly damp. And round about Edinburgh, if last summer was anything to go by, it didn't seem to rain for months and months and months. And we don't have enough acidity. I would have to go way out up into the hills to start finding it. But I strongly suspect the ditches around you will be quite well populated by it. And see Sue nodding, expect she knows it already, don't you, Sue? Have I said anything yet that you don't know already? I don't know.
Yes, lots. I never noticed those white scales.
Ah, well, there you go. They're not nearly so obvious as it becomes a big mature plant like that. But if you rummage down at the base, you'll find them not as brilliantly white, but very, very pale. There's not much colour in them at all. And I love it actually, how easy it is to tell a lot of ferns, even when they've died down. This one will die down at the first frosts. And I should have said the lady fern does as well. The male fern will die down if you have a really hard winter, but it stays sort of green. So you could go out and identify that now. But actually, even when this is died down and you've got the dead fronds, if you peer at these little side branches, you should see that it's not toothed in any way. And you should see on the lady fern, which will also be very died down, that that's quite toothy. You'll be surprised at how much detail you can see once you start knowing what to look for. Right, everyone happy so far? All with them? Don't know if anyone's nodded off. Right, now, something completely different, but very, very common. I always say to people, you need to know 3 ferns: the male fern, the lady fern, and the broad buckler. So here we have the broad buckler. Now, it's still a Dryopteris, but the ones we've looked at so far, we've called them the male ferns, and they've been twice pinnate. This one, if you look at this branch here, it comes out, and that's 1, as a side branch, and that's 2, and each of those side branches has got little pinnules coming off it, little leaflets, and that makes number 3. So it's 3-time branch, not at the very tip. At the tip, it looks twice pinnate, but we're looking lower down. So the buckler ferns, among the Dryopterises, the buckler bit refers to a shield, the shape of a shield, and it's sort of roundish. Though as we do know, Dryopterises all have kidney-shaped indusia, kidney-shaped coverings over their spore cases. But anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about that. And it is quite a broad fern. That's quite a wide frond across there compared with some of the others. It also has a great long stalk down at the base. If you were looking up a slope where you've got these growing, and they like fairly sort of acid woodland again, you'll see that you've got these long stalks before you start having fairly wide branches at the base there. So to go on to slightly closer details, sorry, as I said, you have these long stalks, and here they are starting to expand. Now here's something else that you can tell what it is before you have any other information at all. If you had these little croziers coming up in the spring, you would notice, I'm sure, that they've got what I call stripy scales. You've got them here, dark in the center, pale at the edges. You'll be convinced by that, yes? And I hope you can see it there with the light sort of shining through behind it. The darkness is the most conspicuous bit. And then when you look, you realize there's pale edges there. There's no other fern in Britain that has stripy scales like that. And you might even find this one growing beside the white-scaled lemon-scented fern. So that's 2 that would just jump out at you. And you wouldn't need anything else. You know exactly what it was. We've got one of the side branches here. So again, you can see how it's 1, and then you've got 2, and then these little leaflets or pinnules here they make 3. So that's what we mean about being 3 times pinnate. Right, well, there's 3 of you watching together. I hope you're managing to get this detail, but you can always look at it again later, perhaps, with the computer by yourself. You can see we've got the sori, that's the regions where the spores are going to be. This one has its spores, one of the earliest of all the ferns. It's quite early to get going. And the little kidney-shaped indusia, the coverings, are beginning to lift up. And I hope you might be able to see underneath the little spore cases are beginning to poke out. Can you see the sort of blackness around the edge there? And if you're very lucky, you might convince yourself it looks like lots of little balls. Can anybody actually see that? Yes, maybe, possibly. I'll show you a slightly larger one soon. So these spore cases, they're just about ripe because they're black. That means there's lots of spores inside there, and very soon those spores are going to be released. And we'll talk about that nearer the end. So stripy scales, that's a really good one. We've got these long stalks. I always say it's got long legs because it's quite a long bit you get before you start to get the frond. And it's got these stripy scales. So I won't mind mnemonic as long legs and stripy socks, but that's maybe getting a bit silly and not very scientific, but people sometimes remember things like that when they don't remember anything else at all. So I'm galloping on, apologies for this, but hopefully you might come and watch it again. Another really, really common woodland one, which you'll find in all the pine woods and anywhere nice and acid, is one that's gone and changed its name. The hard fern is its common name because it has these evergreen fronds that stay all winter, and they're quite a harsh texture. It used to be called Blechnum spicant. Now you'll be pleased to know it's been renamed Struthiopterus spicant, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. And it's really unusual because it has 2 kinds of fronds. You've got the vegetative ones that tend to spread out sideways a bit more, and then you've got the fertile ones that stand upright. And the fertile ones are often pink when they're coming up. They look really pretty when they're unfurling. And then when they are opened out, they're so thin. Here's a bit of one of the fertile fronds. And the whole of the back of that little side branch, and it's only once pinnate, they're both just once pinnate, one single branch coming out sideways. The whole of the back of that is going to have spores on it. And you've got a little flap, well, 2 flaps actually, that kind of meet together in the middle, and they're going to peel back, and up the middle there, you'll have a dense mass of little spore cases, or sporangia, to use the right word. And they're going to open up and shed out a lot of spores. But this frond, the fertile fronds, they're not very durable. As soon as they shed their spores, then it's just going to shrivel down. So at this time of the year, you'll find these fronds, and you'll find some other funny little shriveled up ones in the middle, and they'll be the fertile ones. If you look at them, I think you probably will find that you can see that they are very, very narrow. So that's a really distinctive one. I don't think you can go too far wrong with that one just because it's got the 2 kinds of fronds. Now, while we're in the woodland, I just wanted to slip in 2 more utterly distinctive ferns. And there's 2 ferns that I always used to want to muddle up because their names were based on trees. This one is the oak fern. And the oak fern, that's one frond there, and it's a pretty triangular frond. And the 2 lowest branches, side branches, are enormous. They're almost as big as the whole of the rest of the frond. So actually it comes in like 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3. And my little mnemonic is that oak as a word has got 3 letters, and this one has got 3 parts. So that was the way I managed to stop myself muddling it up with the beech fern, which is really stupid because they're nothing like each other. But they do grow together often. They like to grow in woodland. And unlike all the other ferns we've had, they've got a creeping rhizome, which means instead of having a little shuttlecock of a fern, you have a frond popping up here and another frond pops up there and another one over there and another one over there. and has no little indusium over its spore cases. You're looking straight at the little spore cases there, and they're more towards the edge of the pinule rather than towards the center. And they're what we call naked sori, because, oh dear, sorry. Is that a message that my battery's running low? It was a bit stupid. There we are. Okay, now thought I'd really charged it. So it's a naked sorus. There's no indusium. And the lemon-scented fern that we had, that was also a naked sorus. Sounds quite exciting, but isn't really. Just means you see the spore cases. So the other one I wanted to bundle up with was the beech fern. And here's some beech fern, lovely creeping rhizomes, lots of the fronds popping up at intervals, and it gives you a lovely big dense mass. And the beech fern is a long, thin triangle. So it's a triangle like that. And if you look carefully, you'll see that the two lowest side branches, they go sort of backwards, away from the direction that the rest of them go. So the way I remember this one is that beech goes backwards. And that is fairly distinct. If you look round, you'll see that these two are just going off at a different angle. There they are, there and there, and there and there. So I put a next slide in. It's not a very stunning slide, it's a rather dark one. But I'm hoping when you look at this, a bit like I did with those male ferns, that you ought to be able to see there's two different kinds of ferns here. Can we convince ourselves of this? We've got oak, 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 oak. There's a wee bit of oak up there, and there's a little bit of oak there. But we also have, and a bit of oak there, we also have the beech fern. And can you see that these lowest pinny, lowest side branches are going backwards? So it's very, very distinctive, but this kind of fern is easy to overlook. You might think it's just a flowering plant or something, it's just a dense mass of it. But there it is. And if you're ever not sure if something's a fern or not, you have to turn it over and look on the back. And then, of course, you'll find it's got spores beginning to develop. So I hope that helps you to know what you're looking at. Right, now a really easy one, which again, I think possibly people know from their gardens. This one, we've been talking about side branches, but this one doesn't have any side branches. It's a very simple frond. And this is the hart's tongue fern. Now, I don't think this one's going to be terribly common around where you are because it likes a bit of lime. So you might know it, as I say, as a garden fern, but I've not consciously seen it when I've been up in your direction, but maybe I've just not been looking in the right places. It is an asplenium, and the thing about aspleniums is the way they have their spore cases is linear. So here's an enlargement of underneath there, and you see it's as if it's got lines on the back. And so it means that the sorus is linear. Here's a sorus, and it's in a line shape, and it's got wee flaps up the side, and these little flaps are the indusia. So you've got a pair of indusia, and when the spores are ripening inside the spore cases, these little flaps just open back the way, and there you've got all your little spore cases inside, all ready to release the spores. So that makes it an asplenium. And there are quite a lot of aspleniums. Some of them are very common, some of them much less so. And there are two that you're going to find, I think, on walls. I'm sure I've seen them a lot in your area. And the first one that you might be familiar with is one that's called the wall rue, or asplenium, and ruta, which is the rue bit in your area, which is the sort of wall connection. And we know it's an asplenium because look, it's got these little linear sori. Now this is a very small fern, and you're only talking about sort of 2 or 3 inches high, really. That one is more out in the open, so the shape of its fronds is a bit more rounded. This one's a bit more shaded there under that piece of rock, so the fronds are a bit more elongated. But basically, the shape of each of these little side branches is a kind of diamond shape. This is a difficult one to say whether it's once pinnate or twice pinnate, because it's actually rather irregular. And it just depends a bit on how big it is and how well it's growing. But if you just look for this linear arrangement, you can say it's in an asplenium. In most of the aspleniums, you only get a flap, the indusium, down one side there. The heartstung was unusual, it had two flaps. But this is quite immature. The indusia, the flaps, are very white. But when it's ripe, these will just open back the way, and you'll have a whole host of spore cases underneath there. And they'll sort of sprawl out all over the back of the frond. So it'll almost look as if it's brown all over, just because it'll have so many spore cases and so many spores. But just remember to look for, as I said, a kind of diamond shape. And it's a very distinctive one, that. Apart from a flowering plant, there's not a lot else you can muddle it up with. And remember, we know it's a fern because you turn it over, maybe not the first frond, you might have to look for several, but you're bound to find sign of its fertility on the back if you look far enough. And then there's a kind of matching pair of two of them that you tend to get on walls, sometimes together, sometimes separately. And this is another asplenium. And if we look on the back, here we are. We've got our little linear sori. And this one is a bit more mature because the little flap, the indusium, is just turning back. And you can see the darkness in the middle there. And that darkness are the spore cases. And that's where all the little spores are developing. And we'll get onto that bit in a little while. But this one is just once pinnate. It's very, very simple, rather sort of rectangular pinnules, and a nice little thing, rather delicate, fairly distinctive. And this particular one likes a bit of lime, as the previous one does. So in actual fact, this is growing on a limestone area. But when people built walls, all these ferns must have been very pleased with it, because it's given an enormous habitat to ferns that like to grow on lime-rich rocks. And there are quite a few aspleniums that look rather similar to this one, but this is the commonest one. It's called the maidenhair spleenwort, which I think is a slightly odd common name. The spleenwort bit, by the way, is because it was supposed to be good medicinally for spleen. The wort bit always shows that they made some sort of preparation from it. Quite how or why, I'm not sure. But and the maidenhair bit, it doesn't look much like maidenhair fern, except it's dark up the middle. And that's just like the stalks that you get on maidenhair ferns. So maybe that's what it is. But it's a nice wee thing and relatively common, and it's well worth looking out for. And that's evergreen, you can find it now. And then just finally stuffing in another very small wall fern. I've got a few more other woodland ones to come. This is one that people overlook an awful lot of the time. People often pick on tiny little young ferns that are only just starting out in life. They're very young, they're very small, they're not fertile yet. And I say, well, I wouldn't try and identify them because they're not very typical when they're young. And then people walk past a whole wall full of this fern. This fern, again, it likes lime, it likes nice damp rocks or the base of a damp wall. And people, I say, well, aren't you going to look at that one? And they say, no, you said not to look at young ferns. Well, all right, this is very small, only a few inches high. But if you turn it over, it's a fern and it's profusely fertile. And this one is called the brittle bladder fern. And you can see why, because I hope you can see all these little white lumps. And all the spore cases here are enclosed by almost as if they're all in white balloons. Later on, that little balloon will almost kind of burst and you'll see all the little spore cases inside. Now, I'm sorry, the fan has come on my computer, so I don't know if you can hear it. My apologies if you can. It's the brittle bladder fern because when you're looking at it, it will come off in your hand rather easily. And it's a nice, delicate, dainty little fern, and it does die down in the winter. So you're not really going to find it just now. But another one to look out for, which is very common, goes right the way up to high altitudes. Anywhere it's nice and humid and a little bit of lime, it will be in there and it will be very happy. Now, moving on to something else altogether. They're fairly big ferns, and they're not the Dryopteris that we were talking about earlier. They're evergreen ferns, and really there's only one that I want you to worry about, and it's this one, which they're called shield ferns because the indusium is completely circular, like a little shield, and their scientific name is Polystichum, not Polystichum, some people like to make it. And the hard one, which is they're all evergreen, it has a shiny surface, it feels quite sort of hard when you touch it. That is the one which is common round here. I have to say the soft shield fern is a western and southern species, and I don't think you're going to get it without going over to the west coast. Now, there's another one which you would get at high altitude, and that's the common name is the holly fern, and that one is only once pinnate, whereas these ones are twice pinnate. You've got a side branch and it branches again. And the real distinguishing feature for these is that they have mittens. Now you might not see it on every little pinule, but I put that bit round there just to highlight. If you imagine a hand with a mitten like that, you can see my thumb, and I hope you can see where the little thumbs would go in there. Can you see that, anybody? You can see it over here if you sort of rummage around. There's quite a nice one there. It tends to be the one at the base of a side branch that shows it. So we're twice pinnate. We've got a completely circular covering over the indusium, and that makes them, and with the mittens, that makes it a Polystichum. These three are really interesting because that one likes to grow in acid places. This one likes to grow on really good limestone. It needs a lot of lime. This one is high altitude. This one is low altitude. But at some time, these two got together and they hybridized. Usually, if something like that hybridizes, you get a sterile hybrid. But one of the ways that we get new fern species is that when the spores are being formed, and you would have a sort of mismatch from different chromosome numbers from the parents, sometimes something happens and it doubles its chromosome number, and then it becomes a species. And this one here, if you add up the chromosome number of that one, that one, the soft shield fern and the holly fern, you end up with a hard shield fern. And that is where it came from. So you've got two parents, and this is its progeny, but because it doubled its chromosomes, it's now a proper full-blown species. And it's intermediate. It's got the sort of shiny, harsh texture that you get from the holly fern, but it's got the twice pinnate branching you get from the soft shield fern. So this one likes a bit of lime. And where you get nice little ravines, perhaps on the old red sandstone, just a little bit of lime in the rocks, that's, that's where you get the hard shield fern. Right, the slide's determined to be shown. Here's the whole plant. You've got the holly fern. It's a lovely, long, thin frond, and it tapers and tapers and tapers down to the bottom, and virtually no stalk at all. Whereas the hard shield fern, the one you're going to expect to see, it does taper quite a lot, and you do get quite short stalks in at the base there. So there's almost no stalk, but there is a very short one. Whereas the soft shield fern, Polystichum certiferum, has great big long stalks or stipes. And the lowest pinny, the lowest side branches there, are quite wide. It doesn't have any tapering. But I wouldn't worry too much about that, because actually this is the one that you're going to be finding on areas nice and humid, bit of limestone, and a bit of lime. I mean, not too rich lime. It does grow on limestone. I keep touching it, sorry. Also a really distinctive thing, because it tends to grow on rocky walls like in a ravine, you get the rosette dangling down the way. There's not much point in these fronds sticking up because they'd be shading the light from the rest of the fronds. And when you look across a ravine, you see this dark green shiny thing with the fronds sort of dangling down like that because it's evergreen. And it's very distinctive, a really distinctive jizz. So that's one I commend you to look out for. And it's very easy to perhaps overlook as one of the male ferns because it's got this twice pinnate arrangement. But remember, look for the mittens, and then that will help you. So we're nearly there, folks. I just want to say a wee bit about polypodies. Polypodium vulgare is the commonest one, and again, it's the one that you're most likely to find. This one, it likes to grow in woodland. It likes it fairly humid. Got nice simple little frond, just simple stem up the middle and little side branches coming off. You might think you could mix it up with a hard fern, but it doesn't have these different kinds of fronds for the fertile fronds. It has all of its spore arrangements on the back. So the common polypody, it grows on acid sort of, it can grow on the ground, on soil. Here it's probably on a rotten tree stump or something. Nice and acid, you can tell from the mosses and the lazula, it's a lovely acid sort of environment. And this is, as I say, probably the commonest one around you. But if there's a bit of lime, you might have the one that's called Polypodium interjectum. And this is one actually growing in my garden, but it has a thicker texture. This one is showing beautifully the arrangement of the way it has its spore cases. It doesn't have a covering over the spore cases, so you're looking straight at the sorus. They do say that with interjectum, it has an oval sorus, whereas vulgare, the common one, has a round sorus. I've never found that very easy. You can see here it's still green because the spores aren't ready yet, whereas here the spores are ripe and they're a lovely yellowy colour, so that's affecting the colour of the spore cases. So there's actually 3 polypodies, but the third one likes a lot of limestone. This one likes a little bit of limestone and or lime anyway in its soil, or it'll grow on walls, so walls are a good place to look for it. But you're not likely to find this in woodland unless you've got a limestone quarry and it's getting dust all over ash trees or something. It might just about grow on the trees then. Now, I don't find polypodies terribly easy. If it's growing on an acid log in a woodland, I'm quite happy to call it the common polypody. And if it's growing on a wall that's got mortar in it and all the other things that grow there like a bit of lime, I'm happy to call it this one. Sorry, I've got the common name there. It's the western polypody. But if I was recording it, I would like to be very, very sure if I'm not sure. And you can do that if you have a microscope. Now I'm showing here 3 different polypodies. That's vulgare, the common one. This is interjectum, the one that likes a little bit of lime. This is cambricum, which is the southern polypody, and it likes a lot of lime. And I just don't think you get it without going west to lower altitudes. I've certainly seen it west of Inverness, but you've got to get over to the coast. And if you look at a spore case, this is the wee stalk, and this is the spore case on the top. When you look at a spore case, you've got like a little sort of bag really, but around one side of it, there's a line of cells. And these cells here have got thick walls. There's other cells that are going off you can't see so well, that have got thin walls. And I'll show you a drawing of that in a minute, but let's concentrate on these thick-walled cells. If it's the common polypody, when you stick it under the microscope, instantly you think, what a lot of cells it's got. And if you count them, and these thick-walled cells are called the annulus, you'll find 10 to 14. Whereas if, very unlikely, you had the southern polypody, you would find you only had about 5 or 6 cells. But if you had the one that grows on walls, you'll probably find you get 7 to 9 cells. So most of the time, it's the distinction between that has lots of cells and one that has considerably fewer. And that is a way that you can use the microscope to distinguish them. The cells in the annulus here are part of the mechanism for releasing the spores. And I can talk about that when I talk about the life cycle. Now, I'm conscious I've been waffling on for a long while. What I could do is just stop there and leave you to look at a life cycle thing on a website for yourself later, or I could keep talking. So this is a choice. Could somebody give me a decision as to whether you want me to waffle on for another 5 or 10 minutes, or if you've had enough at this point? Is that enough to take in, Sue?
No, I'd like a bit more.
All right, are you happy? Right, still
Don't
there?
let everybody else.
Yep, so
Everything's so clear.
I'll just,
I'd like more too, please.
yeah,
that's all right,
same
okay.
here.
That's, oh, well, nice, right. Sorry, it's funny not getting any feedback. I find this very odd. I'm looking at Sue's face, and I'm aware that the others bob forward sometimes to look at the screen, but I do find Zoom very peculiar. But here we go. Right. I was going to give it all, but that comes up again at the end. So fern spores then. This is looking at the back of one of the shield ferns, one of the pelusticums, the one that has mittens. Can't say it's wildly obvious in this, but actually that's a thumb there and that's the rest of it. The pelusticums all have very bristly little teeth around their little pinnules. But what I want you to look at, never mind which species it is, you can see the indusium and lots of indusia that are shriveling up now. That's because they've done their job. You see these wee brown shriveled objects? They've covered over the spore cases while they're developing, and now the spores are just about ready to be shed. I hope you can see stuff that looks like a lot of frogs, well, no, not frog spawn, lots of little black shiny things. Can you convince yourself there's little black shiny things? Each one of those little black shiny things is a spore case. And each one of them has got 64 spores inside. They're very organized, the way the cells divide and divide and divide. But you've got, I mean, they're really small. I mean, each one of these spore cases doesn't even get up to 1 millimeter or so across. They're tiny. And the spores themselves are really tiny. This is looking at, this is the top of the frond. This is a cross section through the arrangement of how the spores are produced. This is the indusium that when it was young was sort of wrapping over the top of the spore, wrapping around the top of the spore cases. And here are all the wee spore cases sitting on their stalks. And they're beginning to shed their spores. This is taken from a fantastic set of drawings. It was a German set of teaching drawings that used to hang up on the wall in the Botany building in Edinburgh University. And I actually photographed them because they're so beautiful. Absolutely stunning drawings. I think it's based on a Dryopteris actually, but I wouldn't worry about that. What you can see really beautifully are these thick-walled cells that I was talking about for the polypodium. And then you've got thinner-walled cells there. Now, the way spores are released is when the spores are ripe and ready, these thick-walled cells, they contract. And as they sort of squeeze themselves together and they lose air, I think it's gas actually, between each of these thick-walled cells, it rips the whole thing open. Now you might think it just sort of pulls it open and the spores just fall out, but it's not as simple as that, because what happens is that contracts, it opens the capsule, and so it opens, but then actually as soon as it's opened up, it relaxes again and it throws the spores. And if you watch a video that I'm going to direct you towards, because I couldn't manage to get it up on here, I don't seem technologically enough clever at it, you'll see a little animation of how these spores actually get thrown out. And one of the most popular things I used to do with students at the Botanic Garden, if you got a frond like that and stuck it under the microscope, the heat of the lamp of the microscope, this is just a stereo microscope, would make these little spore cases start to open. And you would see little sort of puffs of spores bouncing up. into the air as they got thrown out. So it's quite an interesting thing to do. Anyway, the spores, these little spores here, each spore, oh, here we go, right, sorry, this one's got ripped open and the spores get thrown out. The spore case itself has just very thin walls, so the whole thing does rip very easily. This bit here often has a pair of cells called the lip cells, and that's where it rips. So each spore is a single cell, and it only has one set of chromosomes. When the fern was producing its spores, it did cell division, so that you got one set of chromosomes instead of two sets of chromosomes in the spore. So it's not like a seed, I'm afraid. It's a different thing altogether. It's just one cell, and it's very, very small. But it does have this tough little spore coat. And when it gets wet, that little spore coat splits, and the little cell inside starts to grow. It also sends out a wee thing, a bit like a root. It's not actually a root. It's just more like a sort of hair-like thing that just helps to stick it down to the surface. It doesn't take in anything from this hair-like appendage. It photosynthesizes and does everything, absorbs anything over the surface of these developing cells. So one cell splits and gives you two cells, it divides again and gives you another cell, then they start to divide sideways, and you begin to get what's called a gametophyte. And it's called a gametophyte because it's going to produce male gametes, or like sperm. And when you look at textbook drawings of these little gametophytes, they usually show you a nice big mature one. And because it's nice and convenient, they go and put the male bits down the bottom and the female bits up the top. But actually in real life, it's not like that. They tend to have the male bits when they're young and small. And as they get bigger, and as I always say, more sensible, sorry, they get their female bits. So if you look at a population of gametophytes, and I'll show you a photograph, it's about the best we can do at the moment, you'll see that there's big gametophytes and small gametophytes, and the tiny ones have got these little male structures, and the bigger ones have got little finger-like structures, and they're on the underside, obviously, and that's where the eggs are, waiting to be fertilized from the males. Now, this is only one cell thick. It's very fragile, very thin, very small. We're talking about something that's only a few millimeters big. So these are not roots or anything. These, as I say, function more like wet hairs, just to sort of hold it down. A bit like mosses as well. They don't suck stuff up like that. Everything's done over the surface of the leaf, or the gametophyte, or whatever you call it. So you can actually get them. If it never gets fertilized, you might have the male and female bit on at the same time, and they can self-fertilize, but they tend to fertilize better as a sort of outcrossing arrangement. So here's our little male structure. It's a little cluster of cells, and there's a cell at the top that breaks down. And inside, you've got these things called gametes, and they swim. When it rains, you get a little film of moisture all over the gametophytes, and out come these little things, and they swim. They've got a little spiral structure, they've got wee flipped jelly at one end, and off they go, swimming along, spiraling around. And if you put a gametophyte on a glass slide with a drop of water, sometimes the heat of the lamp and the little drop of water is just enough to make them open up and release these little male gametes. And you see them all thrashing around, and you have to have a high-powered microscope to see this. And it's quite amazing. They don't thrash around for very long. They run out of steam after a bit. I have heard it said that in a sort of straight line, although they're spiraling, they can get up to 10 centimeters. It sounds pretty good for a minute little thing like that. Anyway, off go the male gametes. And elsewhere, you've got these little finger-shaped structures. I've turned it around so it's conveniently facing that way. And you've got the egg down at the base. So this is the female structure. And the female one's called the archegonium, if you want it, and the male one's the antheridium. That anther bit reminds you a bit of pollen, if you want to think of, you know, the male and pollination and so on. But the female one has this neck canal here with a single cell which breaks down when it's ready to receive the male gametes. And as it breaks down, it releases a chemical called antheridiagen. And that goes out into your little film of moisture, and it acts as a sort of attractant to little male gametes that are thrashing around there, trying to find out where to go. So it's almost like a pheromone or something, I suppose. So they kind of sniff it out and off they go. And the first one to make it up the canal there will be able to fertilize the egg. And then you've got 2 sets of chromosomes. Ideally, you would have fertilization between 2 different parent individuals, and that gives you a bit more genetic diversity and so forth. So there we go. You've got your wee gametophyte, which has 1 set of chromosomes, N, and the little first frond has 2 sets of chromosomes because it's been fertilized. And you get proper roots, nice roots that go down into the ground and suck up things and feed the fern. And in no time at all, it gets bigger and bigger. And you've got, well, what you might call a proper fern. But of course, the gametophyte is a fern as well. It's just something that not very many people see. So here's a picture of a damp, earthy surface. And I hope you can see this thing here with 2 lobes. That's a gametophyte. And that's another one there, and another huge one there, and another one there, and another one there, and another one here. You can see they've got 2 lobes. And then if you turn them over, you would find underneath, sometimes, not always, there aren't any structures at all. They just seem to sit there and vegetate. But here, they've been fertilized. And I hope you can see the first little fronds appearing. And you call them sporelings when they get to that. They're not seedlings, they're sporelings. So up here, we've got a liverwort. Liverworts are several cells thick. So that's one way you can tell the difference. And they'll more likely branch and branch and branch. That's a young bit of the liverwort there. But the distinctive thing about the gametophytes is you always have 2, well, I'll say always, nearly always have 2 lobes. There are other gametophytes that look very different, but that's another story really. So I hope you're convinced about these gametophytes. They're not that easy to see, I have to say. Half the time you don't notice them, but when I've been looking for them to show them to people, it's not always the easiest thing to find. And if you had a big dead leaf that landed on top of that, well, that would probably just kill them off. There must be millions and millions of spores out there, and a lot of them just don't get a chance to grow. You see tiny wee gametophyte there, I bet that one's a male. If you were to collect some soil and stick it in a jam jar and put the lid on and make sure it was damp enough, you would almost be sure to have little ferns growing inside it. You might even find you had little gametophytes on the surface. The spores are everywhere, but they just don't often get a chance to grow, or if they do grow, something comes along and eats the gametophyte or something. So when you think of 64 spores in each little spore case, and think how many spore cases are on the back of a frond, you're talking about millions of spores, and that's just one frond on one fern. So I think they're amazing. I hope you think ferns are amazing as well. And it's astonishing really to think out there in the countryside, all these little things that will be sitting there that half the time you just don't even see. And these can overwinter. I found some alpine lady fern spores coming out from under the snow in the happy days when we used to get lots of snow at high altitude. So they can overwinter as well. And then they would just keep growing in the spring. So now, I've got this wretched screen sharing thing at the top. I hope you can't see it. There is on YouTube a terribly good thing called The Secret Life of Ferns. And if you just Google that, it'll probably come up. There are quite a lot of things out there about the life cycle of ferns, but that's one I've used a lot in teaching. I absolutely love it. It's a mixture of animation and real plants. It's made in New Zealand, where of course they've got all these wonderful tree ferns, and it is really lovely. I just love it. I sit and watch it several times a year when I'm teaching. It's just such a nice story, and the way they do it is fabulous. Also, I belong to the British Pteridological Society. Pteridophyte means ferns and horsetails and club mosses and things. we usually just call ourselves the Fern Society. It's easier to say. We've got the Scottish group. It's people from all over Scotland, like Skye, and I don't think there's anyone particularly in the Inverness area. And every so often we get together and we go and perhaps visit a garden, or we go and see ferns in the wild. If you wanted to be put on the mailing list, I'm sure Audrey would be delighted to give you my email address. I didn't put it on here in case this ends up on YouTube or something. What else was I going to say? And if you wanted me to come up and do some kind of ferny trip, we might manage to arrange that, but it sounds like you've got your programme all made up for this year. So I think that's it, folks. Shall I stop screen sharing now and then I can see you again? That's all right? Yes, good. Stop share. There we go. Hello, everyone. Wake up now, I can see you. Well, questions? Right idea. I'm going to sleep.
Can I ask you something, Heather? Can you just clarify that the ferns that we'll be seeing just now, the evergreen ones, are things like the male fern and the shield fern?
Yes, that's right.
Hard fern.
Yes, yes.
Common
The
ones.
male fern might look a bit, well, they'll look a bit scruffy. Some of them survive the winter a bit better than others. I think the scaly males are a wee bit hardier, say, than the common male fern. And if you have really hard weather, they do look very decrepit. And if you have snow, they'll just sort of lie flat on the ground and look a bit depressed. But the broad buckler fern, that should still be reasonably, well, sort of green and well, moderately obvious. You can't see the fertile structures on the back. That's all gone at this time of the year. But you get the general frond shape. You ought to be able to see the scales. If the scales are wet, they all look dark anyway. But if you sort of pick some of them off and just hold them for a minute, the heat of your hand helps them to dry out, and then you can see a bit more structure in them. So you should be able to find something. And the wall ferns, apart from the brittle bladder fern, but the aspleniums, they're all evergreen. And by the coast, you would have the sea spleenwort as well. I mean, I almost should have just tailored this for you people and put in the ones that we don't get around Edinburgh, but you all get, because you've got some lovely, lovely ferns up your way. And it's nice for them to be so common there when, you know, we're struggling a bit around here. But we've got different things as well. Yeah. Don't forget to unmute yourself if you want to say something. In fact, if you flap your hand, I'll know which person to look at as well. Someone else?
There used to be holly fern at Ravens Crag, where the, I don't know if it still grows there, where the train goes through the cutting behind Strathpeffer.
Oh, really? Oh. Yeah, I'm afraid my local knowledge is not good enough to know precise localities. You can try looking it up in the sort of recent checklist for, you know, Brian Ballinger's checklist, and then you might, that is Easter Ross, isn't it? Yeah. Is it? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And we do get hart's tongue fern here, where, you know, sometimes where, you know, dam building where there's a lot of lime.
Yes. Old mills are often a good place for things like that, because you'll have had people, well, I think sometimes it must come from gardens, but I don't know how much it's native round about you, but it is definitely a lower altitude thing, and it does like a lot of lime.
I've seen it in the churchyard in Inverness.
There you go. Yeah. It's a really good garden fern. I was speaking to a garden group last night about ferns to grow in your garden. And really, if you want one fern that's going to keep going and be evergreen and look nice all the time, that's a good one.
You find it in some of the woods on the Black Isle as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Wood and the ravines where there's little ferns going down.
There you go then. Excellent. And you presumably have the hard shield fern there as well then, will you?
I think so, yes.
Yes. Lots of wee mittens dangling down the side of the ravine.
Mm.
Could I just ask
Yes.
about the ferns which tend to grow on trees?
Yes.
How does the sort of geology affect them? Because you would think if they're on a tree, they're not enormously affected by.
Well, I said that generally speaking, growing on a tree, you'd expect it just to be the common polypody because, well, most oak, most bark, particularly some of that in oak tree, it is fairly acid anyway. And so you could just as a complete generalization say that ferns, polypodies growing on trees, it's going to be acid. And so you get other ones like the broad buckler sometimes if it's wet enough, just in the angle of the tree, you'll see one up there, and it's acid. I'm a bit cautious about saying that because I remember down in Cornwall, there was a limestone quarry, and because it was a lime area, there were ash trees, and ash, the bark is not actually as acid as other trees. So you've already got a bark that's not so acid. And with limestone quarry, there was all this dust blowing all over the trees, and you actually had the southern polypody, which is really lime demanding. But that's not a problem. Well, you're in Newcastle, I noticed. Thanks for putting that on.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, certainly with us, you don't get an awful lot of limestone, to be honest. Scotland is not hotching with limestone. There's a few special areas, and then everyone likes to go there to find other goodies. But one of the best sources of lime really is walls. And you can get the southern polypody on walls, but it's, well, the southern tells you quite a lot because actually it grows in the winter. And it starts to grow at the end of the summer when you get, it's a Mediterranean species. So you can imagine the end of the summer when you're beginning to get the winter rains, it starts to grow then. And that doesn't work very well at high altitude, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to see that in Aviemore then.
No, it's interesting. Everyone ought to say where they're from, actually. I didn't realise I was speaking to quite such a diverse group, which is lovely.
I wonder also with the polypodies, does the poddy bit mean anything? It implies feet to me.
Yeah, I think it's because it's got this creeping rhizome, and you see lots of wee bits sticking out. And it can get quite a distance, I suppose. Well, it's a rather slow walker, but the poly's many, and I suppose it's pod. Got lots of wee feet going off in all different directions. That's what I've always understood in my own personal explanation. But I hope I'm not leading you astray.
Thanks.
Can I ask if you've got a favourite fern?
Sorry?
Can I ask if you've got a favourite fern? Because often we have favourite flowers. I wonder if you've got a favourite fern.
I'm not very good at favourites because my favourite is the one that I like best at this given moment in time. In the spring, when the scaly males are coming up, I think they're absolutely wonderful. They're so beautiful. And then that does tend to be a favourite. It's probably the alpine lady fern because that's what I did my PhD on. And that is a very pretty, well, it's as beautiful as the common lady fern. And I was looking at a particular variety that's only found in Scotland. And that's a very narrow little form. And it's beautiful. I don't know. I like lots of things, really. All ferns are favourites. Some are more favourites than others.
One that's probably not your favourite because it's not even a fern is where does bracken fit in all this?
I should have put bracken in. I thought people might actually be able to identify bracken anyway. Bracken is a fern. I think a lot of people think it's such a hooligan. It can't be a fern because, ferns are special and nice and beautiful. But bracken is a fern. It's got a creeping rhizome that can go about 1 metre a year. And it's not had a very good press, which is a shame because it used to be a really valued resource and people used to really like their bracken. You could cut it at the end of the summer for bedding, and they used to feed all their straw to the cattle because they didn't have, like winter silage and they're really short of food in the winter. You can pull the stems if you wait for it to just brown off in the autumn before it's completely died down, when you've still got quite a decent standing stem. If you pull it out of the ground, the bit that goes from just where it goes into the ground is a really, really tough bit. And when they thatch, they leave these tough bits sticking out. And it's an amazingly robust thatch. If you go to the Kingussie Folk Museum, you can see they've had bracken thatch there for a long, long while. I think it might be getting a bit tatty now, but they said it was a very good quality thatch. But it's incredibly tedious to gather because every single stem has to be yanked out of the ground. But they did used to like their bracken. There were regulations about how, you know, what time of the year you were allowed to cut it so you didn't spoil it. But when they changed land management, it should be a woodland fern. In woodland, it's not too much of a nuisance because it's got the canopy to suppress it. But take the trees away and give it an open hillside, take the cattle away that would trample it down, and put in sheep. And the sheep don't like going into the bracken, they just walk around the edge. So of course it just spreads and spreads and spreads. And that's why in more recent, centuries really, it's just spread and made a nuisance of itself. And it's poisonous if cattle get a taste for it. You can get pigs to root it out because they don't have a very long life and they don't live long enough to die from it. But it's not very popular. It's a shame because it's beautiful. Nectaries. Next time you look at some bracken, obviously it's died down at the moment, but if you just look underneath each side branch, particularly near the base of the frond, you'll see a wee lumpy bump. And early on in the season and early on in the morning, you'll find a little drop of nectar there. And you might see ants trotting up and down having a wee suck. So it's the only British fern that has a nectary. So there you go.
Heather, can I ask you, lemon-scented fern is often called lemon-scented mountain fern.
Yes, it's got quite a few common names as well. Yeah,
I mean, is it associated with mountains? The mountain one?
Because it likes the acid, it's more upland.
Sorry, it's more
upland.
Oh, right.
So that would make it more montane, really. I mean, round about Edinburgh, you're way up into the hills before you're finding it. But as you go further north, well, you know, lots of montane things come further south as you go north anyway, but it's more acid as well. And that helps you to find it at lower altitudes, right down to sea.
Right, so it's no different.
No, it's the same thing.
At lower altitudes.
Yes, yes. It's the same fern, it's just the habitat.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I'm coming from a different viewpoint from you people. Sorry about that. Well, someone else?
Other questions? No?
No, I'm happy. Good. Well, rush out. Well, no, you don't need a torch. I think you can wait till tomorrow, but you will find quite a few ferns to have a look at on your way around. And you might, if you're very lucky, find the odd gametophyte. And places like if you get a tree blowing over and you've got the nice base plate, it's a sort of bare area to colonise. And if the spores are blowing in on there, that's a good place to find gametophytes.
I'll have to see if my colleagues here want to go out looking for ferns in the next few days.
Well, there you go.
Just along the road from us, with where I was trying to identify ferns the other week and gave up and discussed. So maybe knowledge.
Well,
back.
Well, I hope you managed to identify at least some. But remember, male fern, lady fern, broad buckler. That does cover rather a lot of ferns. But you're lucky, you'll have a bigger diversity than we do around Edinburgh.
But then thanks very much on behalf of everyone. I don't know if we can clap. I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
Yes.
Thank you for the time and the information. Fascinated here, and I'm sure it's going to inspire. We do already have a date on our calendar for going out and looking at ferns, but we might come back to your offer for our calendar next year.
And what we could do is if I drove north and you drove south or something, or I do spend a week up at Darnoch in August every year, so if we could coincide round about then, that might suit people. but there you go. But you've got a whole year to
Right
get up.
now.
Right, well, thanks for coming, everyone. That was very nice of you.
Yeah,
Nice to
thank
meet
you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Right,
Thank you.
all right.
Excellent talk.
Okay, bye-bye just now then. Right, all right, Audrey, everyone.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Right, bye, everyone.
Wonderful.
Right, off we go.